I never thought much about night work. In fact, it suited me better than the 9-to-5 grind I'd left behind in the city. The Forest Service had openings for seasonal rangers, and I figured a few months in the Appalachian Mountains would be exactly what I need. Quiet air, steady pay, and no constant traffic noise outside my window. The drive-in felt longer than I expected. The 2-lane road wound endlessly, climbing higher and higher through ridges of dark green. The air outside grew damp, heavy, like the woods themselves were pressing against the truck. I rolled the window down at one point, hoping for a refreshing breath, but all I got was the smell of wet leaves and pine needles baked by the sun. I stopped at a gas station, about 20 miles from the park boundary. It was one of those places that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years to pumps. It's a single rusted Coke machine out front, and a flickering fluorescent bulb buzzing against the awning. I grabbed coffee inside, and when I mentioned to the cashier that I'd be working nights at the park, he went quiet. Not annoyed quiet. Not bored quiet. But the kind of silence that makes the air suddenly heavier. 2 men sitting by the window, both older, both with skin weathered from a lifetime outdoors, looked up at me at the same time. Their eyes lingered too long. One of them leaned toward, the other muttered something, and shook his head. When I left with my coffee, the older man with the gray beard followed me out. He stopped just shy of the door and called out, "Don't stay past dark." That was all he said. No explanation. He just stood there, arms folded, watching me pull away. I laughed it off at first. People in small towns had their legends, their superstitions. I figured he was one of those types who liked to spook outsiders. Still, the way he said it flat, without humor, hung with me during the last stretch of road into the ranger station. The station wasn't much. A squat wooden building with peeling paint, surrounded by gravel and tall weeds. The windows looked foggy, like the glass hadn't been cleaned in years. Inside smelled faintly of damp wood and old coffee. My supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Crawford, handed me a binder of procedures, a set of keys, and a handheld radio that had seen better days. "Most of your job's simple," he said. "Walk the trails. Check the campsites. Log what you see. Radio, if there's an emergency." He looked me over like he wasn't entirely sure I'd last. "You'll hear things out here," he added. "Foxes, coyotes, sometimes elk if you're lucky. Don't go spooking yourself." That was the extent of my training. My first night was quiet. Too quiet. I made a slow patrol around the main loop trail, a flashlight beam catching spider webs strung between branches, dew glittering like tiny beads. The air was still, without so much as a breeze. I could hear every crunch of my boots on the gravel path, every breath that left my chest. Normally, I liked silence. But this was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Back at the station, I brewed another pot of bitter coffee and logged my shift. Nothing unusual. No campers reported missing. No wildlife encounters. Just silence, punctuated by the groan of the old buildings settling in the night. By the third night, I noticed the quiet wasn't just the absence of sound. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. No owls, no crickets, no rustle of small animals moving through brush. Just nothing. Around 2 in the morning, I sat by the station window, sipping coffee. The reflection of my face floated on the glass, superimposed over the black tree line outside. For a moment I thought I saw something move, just a quick shift, like a figure slipping between trees. I blinked, leaned closer. Nothing. Only the swaying of branches. I told myself it was fatigue. The job was monotonous, and my body wasn't used to staying up all night. That had to be it. But the next evening, when I stopped again at the gas station for coffee, the gray-bearded man was there. Same seat, same stare. As I walked past, he muttered again, low enough that I almost missed it. "They don't like the dark." I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his eyes stopped me cold. That night, when I locked the station door behind me, I realized something had changed. I was no longer looking forward to the quiet. Now I dreaded it. Now I dreaded it. It didn't take long before the routine started to wear me down. By my 5th night, I was moving on autopilot, flashlight in one hand, radio clipped to my vest, the same loop trail beneath my boots. The binder of procedures made it sound so official, but in practice, it was just walking in circles, logging that nothing had changed. Still, I told myself that was a good thing. Nothing changing meant no emergencies. No fires, no injured hikers, no lost kids. Just me, the trees, and the dark. But the silence was beginning to feel heavier. It pressed down on me like a thick blanket, suffocating, until even the smallest sound made me jump. The first strange thing happened around midnight. I'd been walking along the ridge trail, a path that cuts close to the cliffs overlooking a valley. The moon was low, throwing weak silver light between the branches. My flashlight beam caught the edges of rocks, roots, and the glisten of damp leaves. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling. At first, I thought it was a rabbit or a raccoon. I stopped, expecting to hear the scurry of paws darting through brush. But the sound stopped too. I stood there for a long moment, straining, heart thumping just a little harder. When I moved again, the rustling started up behind me, step for step. I swung the flashlight around, catching nothing but the empty trail. My throat tightened. "Hello?" My voice carried into the woods, sharp and unnatural in the silence. No response. I forced myself to keep walking. Every hair on my neck was standing upright, but I pushed forward, telling myself it was nothing. Animals follow scents. Maybe it was a stray dog. Maybe I was just jumpy. But when I reached a fork in the trail and stopped to check my map, the sound came again. This time, closer, distinct. Footsteps, and then something else. A whisper. Not words exactly, but the cadence of speech. A hushed, broken rhythm carried on the still air. I whipped the flashlight into the trees. My beam cut across trunks, leaves, shadows, nothing. My ears strained, chasing the sound, but just as quickly as it started, it stopped. I walked faster after that. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every crunch of gravel beneath my boots sounded too loud, echoing through the forest. When I finally reached the trailhead near the Ranger Road, I stopped and leaned on the post for support. My hand was damp with sweat where it clutched the flashlight. That's when I smelled. It's metallic, sharp like iron. It clung to the air in a way that made the back of my throat tighten. I'd smelled it before blood, or at least something close to it. But there was no sign of an animal carcass, no fresh kill from predators. The forest floor looked undisturbed. The smell faded almost as soon as I noticed it, leaving only damp leaves and cold dirt. But I couldn't shake it. The next night, I found something worse. On the South Trail, about 2 miles in, I saw carvings in the trees. At first I thought they were initial scampers marking their presence, kids leaving little love notes in the bark. But when I looked closer, they didn't make sense. Crude spirals, jagged symbols, uneven stick figures with elongated limbs. The cuts were rough, deep, as though made in a hurry with a dull blade. Some looked fresh, sap still glistening around the edges. I jotted them down in the logbook. But when I showed them to Crawford, he barely looked up. "Locals messing around," he said. "Don't pay it any mind." But the more I thought about it, the less it felt like kids fooling around. These weren't doodles. They felt deliberate. The whispers returned the following night. This time, they were clearer. Not sentences, not words I could make sense of, but layered. Like more than one voice speaking at once, overlapping, and every time I stopped walking, they stopped too. By then my nerves were frayed. Sleep didn't come easily. Even when I managed to drift off during the day, I woke to the sound of tapping branches against the window, I told myself. But the rhythm felt too intentional. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. The shadows outside the station grew heavier. More than once, I swore I saw someone standing at the edge of the tree line, beyond where the light from the porch lamp reached. Always still, always silent. When I blinked, they were gone. I kept trying to rationalize it. Isolation messes with your head. Fatigue makes you hear things, but deep down I knew it was more than that. The forest wasn't just silent. It was listening. Asterisk, it was a little past noon when the radio crackled with the first missing person report. I'd been back at the ranger station, logging the previous night's patrol. Still shaken by those whispers in the woods, the voice on the other end was sharp. Clip someone calling from the visitor center. We've got a situation. Camper unaccounted for. Party says he didn't come back last night. For a moment, I didn't process it. Then the weight of the words sank in. A missing person. I grabbed my pack, flashlight, and the map binder. Crawford met me in the parking lot, already pulling on his jacket. He didn't look surprised. Annoyed, maybe, but not surprised. Another one? He muttered under his breath. Another one. The way he said it made my skin crawl. The group of campers was waiting near the trailhead when we arrived. 3 college-aged kids, pale-faced and anxious. One of them thin, with a ball cap turned backwards, kept pacing. He was with us last night, the kid said. We were at the fire, drinking a little. Nothing crazy. He said he needed to take a leak, but he never came back. We thought maybe he crashed in his tent, but when we woke up this morning, nothing. His pack's here. His phone. Everything except him. Crawford started asking routine questions: what time he left, what he was wearing, if they'd searched nearby. But my eyes kept drifting to the campsite itself. The tents were set up in a small clearing. Fire pit in the middle still lined with cold ash. The missing guy's belongings were neatly arranged inside his tent. Sleeping bag rolled up, backpack zipped, shoes by the flap. It didn't look like he'd left in a hurry. It looked like he'd planned to come back. We began the search with a grid pattern, sweeping out from the campsite. The other campers volunteered to help, but Crawford sent them back to the station with another ranger. Better if you stay put, he told them firmly. I wasn't sure if he was protecting them or keeping them from seeing something. The woods swallowed us quickly. Thick underbrush, uneven ground, the damp smell of soil rising with every step. I called the man's name a dozen times, my voice carrying through the trees. No response, not even an echo. After an hour, we found something odd. A patch of disturbed soil about 20 feet off the trail. Not tracks exactly, but as if the ground had been churned up, roots exposed. Leaves scattered, dirt uneven. I crouched, brushing my hand over the spot. The earth felt softer than the rest, almost spongy, like it had been dug up recently. Animal den? I suggested. Crawford stood over me, arms crossed. Doesn't look like it. The smell hit me then. Faint, but sharp. Metallic. The same smell I'd noticed on the ridge trail a few nights before. I straightened slowly, my pulse quickening. We searched until the light began to fade, covering every spur, trail, and deer path. Nothing. No broken branches. No torn clothing. No shoe prints leading away. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. As dusk settled, Crawford called it. We'll regroup in the morning. I didn't argue, though every part of me resisted turning my back on that clearing. The silence had grown unbearable, pressing in on me until even the crunch of my boots sounded foreign. Driving back to the station, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Just once I saw something, A pale figure standing among the trees at the edge of the road. Too far to see clearly, too still to be an animal. I blinked, and it was gone. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay on the cot in the ranger station, staring at the ceiling, listening. Every creak of the old beams made my chest tighten. Every gust of wind against the siding felt like footsteps circling the building. At one point, I swore I heard breathing just outside the window. Slow, steady. Too heavy to be the wind? I sat up, heart hammering, staring into the dark glass, but all I saw was my own reflection. Pale and wide, dash-eyed. The next morning, the search resumed. More rangers joined, along with volunteers from town. We found no sign of the missing camper. No clothing, no scraps, no blood, nothing. By the third day, the search was officially called off. Presumed lost, the paperwork said. But I knew better. There hadn't been any sign of him leaving. No trail, no struggle, just the disturbed earth, and that faint metallic smell clinging to the air like a warning. Smell clinging to the air like a warning. The morning after they called off the search, the station felt wrong. Not in any obvious way. Nothing was broken, nothing out of place. But the air inside felt heavier, as if someone had been there while I slept. The coffee pot was still warm when I walked in, though I knew I hadn't brewed anything. I told myself Crawford must have stopped by, but when I checked the log, his signature wasn't there. That night, the first storm in weeks rolled over the mountains. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof of the ranger station, filling the gutters until water spilled onto the porch. The thunder cracked across the ridges, rattling the windows. I almost welcomed the noise. It drowned out the silence. I sat at the desk, half-heartedly filling in my patrol notes when the radio crackled. Not unusual. Storms mess with the signal, but then I heard it something beneath the static. A voice, muffled, distorted. At first I thought it was another ranger, maybe calling from the other side of the park. But the words were broken, fragmented. Don't stay. The hair on my arms rose. I leaned in, pressing the speaker closer. The voice dissolved back into static, then cleared again, sharper this time. Behind you. My chair scraped back as I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the small office. Empty, just the rain streaking down the windows. The storm booming overhead, I told myself it was interference. CB bleed through? Maybe. Somebody on a nearby channel. But the voice hadn't been random chatter. It had been directed at me. The next night, I kept the radio close. I didn't want to hear it, but I also couldn't ignore it. For hours, there was nothing. Just the low hiss of static when I tested the knob, but around 2:15 a.m., it came alive again. First, just a burst of white noise. Then a faint hum, like someone breathing into the mic. Then my name clear, spoken in a low, drawn-out whisper. I froze. My skin prickled cold, every muscle locked. Nobody knew me out here. Nobody used my first name over the ranger channels. The voice repeated it slowly, as if savoring each syllable. I yanked the power knob, cutting the radio dead. The silence that followed was almost worse. I sat there in the dark, hands trembling. The storm had passed, leaving only the faint sound of dripping water outside. That's when I realized something else. The silence wasn't complete. There was a faint clicking sound. Irregular, like static, but mechanical. It was coming from the corner of the room. From the other radio, the one mounted to the UHO. The one I hadn't turned on. The next morning, I told Crawford. He didn't even look up from his paperwork. Interference, he said flatly. Weather does that sometimes, but it said he cut me off with a look. Drop it. Focus on your patrols. That was it. No explanation. No concern. Just dismissal. I left his office with the sickening realization that he already knew. And whatever he knew, he wasn't going to tell me. The radio stayed off the next few nights. I couldn't bear the thought of hearing it again. But that didn't stop the voices. I started hearing them outside. Not through the speakers. Through the trees, faint, distant, carried on the wind except there was no wind. Sometimes it was a single word. Sometimes just my name. Always in that same whispering cadence, like someone leaning close to my ear. And always at night. When I was alone, the worst came a week later. I was on night patrol. The moon bright enough to see without a flashlight. The trail glowed faintly silver. Mist drifting low across the ground. The radio on my belt clicked on by itself. Not static this time. Not interference. A voice. Loud and urgent. Stop. I froze mid-step. The beam of my flashlight wavered across the trees, catching nothing but mist. My throat tightened. My legs refused to move. Then the voice came again. Don't. Look. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run, but I couldn't. My body was locked, caught between fight and flight. The woods were silent. Too silent, then slowly. Something shifted in the mist ahead. A shape. Tall. Still watching. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. My hand twitched toward the radio, but before I could touch it, the signal cut out. The figure dissolved with the mist, and I was alone again. Back at the station, I slammed the radio down on the desk. The metal clanged, echoing through the empty room. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it, chest heaving. I thought about leaving then. Just walking out, getting in the truck, and never coming back. But when I looked out the window, I saw the tree line, and I knew somehow that whatever was out there wouldn't let me go that easily. Asterisk. There was one place in the park we were never supposed to go. The old fire lookout tower. It sat near the northern boundary, on a hill that overlooked miles of dense forest. Back when the park first opened, it had been used regularly, but Crawford told me it had been condemned for years. Unsafe structure, he said. Stay away. Don't even bother hiking up there. So I didn't. At least. Not at first, but then I saw the light. It was a little after 3 a.m. The forest was quiet. The kind of stillness that feels unnatural, where even the owls keep their silence. I'd just finished checking one of the campsites when something caught my eye on the horizon. A faint glow, flickering. I stopped in the middle of the trail. Squinting through the trees, it wasn't lightning. The sky was clear. It wasn't a campfire. Too high up. It wasn't a plane. The light didn't move. It was coming from the top of the tower. For a long moment, I stood there in the dark, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. Maybe it was reflection from the moon. Maybe my eyes were tired, but the longer I looked, the clearer it became. A steady, orange flicker, like a lantern swaying behind glass. I should have radioed it in. I should have gone back to the station, but curiosity, or maybe something stronger, pulled me uphill. The trail was overgrown, branches scraping at my arms as I pushed through. The air grew colder as I climbed, my breath fogging in the beam of my flashlight. By the time I reached the base of the tower, I was sweating through my shirt, though the night was cold. The tower loomed above me, a dark silhouette against the stars. Its metal frame was rusted, the wooden steps rotted in places. A heavy padlock hung on the door at the bottom, except it wasn't locked. The shackle dangled loose. The lock snapped open. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but then the lantern flickered again, spilling faint orange light across the top windows, and I climbed. The stairs groaned beneath my boots, splintering with each step. I gripped the railing tightly, trying not to look down at the black void below. My flashlight swung in my free hand, catching glimpses of graffiti carved into the boards, names, dates, crude symbols. Halfway up, the smell hit me. Not the metallic temps I'd noticed before. This was different, old, damp, a mix of mildew, dust, and something else. Sour, like spoiled meat long since dried out, it clung to the back of my throat, making me swallow hard at the top. I pushed the door open. The hinges shrieked, the sound slicing through the silence. The room was small, maybe 12 feet across, with windows on all sides. Dust coated every surface. Cobwebs hung thick in the corners. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, and there, in the middle, sat the lantern. Its flame danced steadily, warm and bright, but there was no one there. I crouched beside it, my hand trembling as I reached out. The glass was warm, fresh. Someone had lit it recently. Beside the lantern lay something else, a ranger's hat. Old and faded, the brim frayed, the emblem half worn away. I lifted it slowly, brushing away the dust. It looked decades old, but the fabric was damp, so it had only just been left there. That's when the radio on my belt clicked on. Not static this time, not whispers. A voice. Clear, direct. Don't look down. My blood ran cold. I froze, my fingers tightening around the brim of the hat. Slowly, against every instinct, I lowered my gaze. Boot prints, fresh ones, circling me on the dusty floorboards. They hadn't been there when I entered. My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat. I spun, flashlight beams slicing through the empty room. Nothing, no one. Just the lantern, the dust, and the prints. But the prints weren't finished. As I watched, more appeared, one after another. forming in the dust as though someone invisible was walking, slow and deliberate, around me. The floorboards creaked. The lantern flickered, and then silence. I backed toward the door, every nerve screaming. My boots slipped on the warped wood, and I nearly fell. The radio clicked again. This time, the voice was different, deeper, ragged, like air being forced through a throat that didn't want to speak. Stay, that was all. One word, then the lantern went out. Darkness swallowed the tower. I fumbled with my flashlight, the beam finally cutting through the pitch black. The room was empty. The prints were gone, but the smell remained. Stronger now. Metallic, sour, rotting. I bolted down the stairs. 2 at a time, the structure groaning beneath me. Branches clawed at my arms as I tore back down the hill, lungs burning, legs shaking. When I finally reached the station, I slammed the door behind me and collapsed against it. Chest heaving. The radio on the desk was already on. Static hissed from the speaker, and underneath, it faint but unmistakable, was laughter. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the ranger station with every light on. The radio unplugged and shoved into a desk drawer, and the doors locked tight. My flashlight never left my hand, but the worst part wasn't what happened in the tower. It was knowing that I couldn't tell anyone who would believe me. Hey, Crawford. I followed a light into the condemned fire tower and found a lantern burning on its own. And by the way, I think something invisible walked circles around me while whispering into my radio. No, he'd think I'd lost it, and maybe I had. But then I remembered the footprints, the way they formed, deliberate and heavy, like someone wanted me to see them. That wasn't in my head. By morning, I'd made up my mind. If I couldn't tell anyone, I'd look into it myself. I started with the filing cabinets. Most of them were old. Dented metal things, stuffed with decades of reports, camping permits, wildlife incidents, maintenance logs, dusty paper that smelled of mildew and rust. I skimmed through, flipping one file after another, until I found the missing persons reports. The first one was dated in 1982. A hiker named Thomas, Hall, mid-30s. Last seen near the northern boundary, around the base of the ridge. Never found. The report was thinned to pages at most. Search conducted for 3 days. Dogs brought in. Trail went cold. No remains recovered. I set it aside and pulled the next one. Every single one followed the same pattern. Campers, hikers, even a ranger or two. All of them disappearing in the same general area. The wording in each file was almost identical, like it had been copy-pasted. Search conducted. Evidence inconclusive. Presumed deceased, and then the file just ended. But the strangest part wasn't what was written, it was what was missing. Some of the folders had clearly been tampered with, pages ripped out. Entire sections blacked over with thick marker. One file from 2004 mentioned an incident involving the Northern Watchtower, but the details were gone. Just a single line remained, scrawled at the bottom of the page in handwriting that didn't look official at all. Don't let them in. I leaned back in the chair, the file dangling in my hand, heart pounding in my chest. None of this was protocol. Rangers don't just redact reports. They don't tear out pages and leave cryptic warnings. This was deliberate. Someone maybe. Several someones had been covering this up for decades. The station phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin, fumbling it off the receiver. Hello? Silence. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Nothing. Not even a dial tone. Then, faintly, I heard it breathing. Slow, shallow, right on the line. Ranger. The voice was gravelly, broken, like someone trying to force words through lungs full of water. I slammed the receiver down, chest heaving. After that, I didn't touch the phone again. Instead, I spread the reports across the desk, arranging them by year. The pile grew, page after page, a timeline of vanishings. Every 5 to 7 years, without fail, someone disappeared. Always near the ridge. Always written off as lost in the wilderness, but there was no pattern in who vanished. Men, women, Young, old, it didn't matter. The only common thread was location, and the last one on file. 9 years ago. Which meant if the pattern held, we were due. That thought sat in the pit of my stomach, heavy and cold. I didn't notice at first that the sun had set again. The station windows were dark, reflecting the papers strewn across the desk. My reflection stared back at me, pale and hollow, dash-eyed, except there was another face beside mine. Just for a moment, a pale shape in the glass. Too tall, too thin, standing over my shoulder. I spun around. The room was empty. But when I looked back at the window, reflection was gone. I shoved the papers into a drawer, my hands shaking and killed the lights. I couldn't sit there anymore. Not with the walls pressing in. Not with the shadows shifting every time I blinked. I stepped outside, the night air sharp and cold against my skin. The forest was dark, the tree lines swaying in the wind, but the silence was worse. No owls, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The kind of silence that feels alive. I could feel it watching me. When I finally crawled into the ranger cabin bed, exhaustion won out. My eyes closed heavy, but even in sleep, I wasn't free. I dreamt of the tower, a footprint circling me faster and faster, until the floor gave way and I was falling into a black void. And in the distance, faint but clear, I heard that same broken voice whisper, "You're next." Asterisk, they say. Once you see something you can't explain, the real terror doesn't come right away. It comes later. When you're alone, when the world gets quiet, when your mind has space to replay it over and over again. That's how it was after the tower, and after reading those files. I couldn't unsee the footprints. Couldn't unhear that rasping voice. Couldn't shake the reflection in the glass. But the worst part was, knowing this wasn't random, something had been here for decades. And now it had noticed me. Crawford ordered me on night watch the next evening. I didn't argue. The last thing I wanted was to sound paranoid. But the idea of stepping back into those woods made my stomach twist. By the time I left the station, the air was already heavy. No moon, no stars. Just black sky pressing down. The beam of my flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the dark. Every branch looked like a hand reaching for me. Every shadow twitched at the corner of my vision. I kept telling myself, it's just another patrol. Just walk the trails. Check the camps. Come back. But deep down I knew better. The first hour was uneventful. Empty campsites, still air, nothing but the crunch of gravel under my boots. Then I started hearing it. Not footsteps. Not branches snapping. A hum, low, almost mechanical, vibrating through the trees. At first I thought it was a generator, maybe from a cabin, but it moved when I moved. Always just ahead of me. I followed it, deeper into the woods. The smell hit me next. That same sour rot I'd noticed in the tower, only stronger now. It coated the back of my tongue, made me gag. I swept my light across the ground. Leaves, dirt, nothing unusual. But when I turned, I saw it. A shape, tall, thin, just beyond the edge of the beam. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stood there watching. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I raised the flashlight higher. The beam caught its head, and it snapped out of sight. No sound of retreat. No rustling brush. Gone. I spun in a circle. Light darting between the trees. Nothing. Just the hum. Vibrating louder now, surrounding me. I reached for my radio station. "This is 42. Do you copy?" "Static, Crawford." "Anyone on channel?" The static broke, and a voice came through. But it wasn't Crawford. "Behind you?" I whipped around so fast I nearly tripped. The light wavered, catching trunks, branches, shadows. Empty dot, the hum stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. I forced myself back onto the trail. Boots crunching faster now. My throat was dry, every breath ragged. That's when I saw them, boot prints. Fresh ones, pressed deep into the mud. Leading off the trail, into the brush. But they weren't mine. I knelt, running my fingers across one of the prints. The edges were sharp. Recent, too recent. I raised my light slowly, beam tracing the trail of prints deeper into the dark. And then they just stopped mid-dash stride, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. Something snapped behind me. I spun, heart hammering nothing, but the air was different now. Heavy, thick, like the forest itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it. Not the hum. Not a voice breathing right next to my ear. Hot, wet. I staggered back, swinging the flashlight wildly. Empty trees. But when I glanced down at the mud, the prints were back. Not in front of me, behind me, leading right up to where I stood. My legs moved before my brain did. I ran. Branches whipped my face. Rocks tore at my boots. The forest blurred around me as I sprinted down the trail, lungs burning. The smell of rot closing in behind me. I didn't stop until the ranger station came into view, its porch light glowing like a beacon in the dark. I crashed through the door, slamming it shut, chest heaving, sweat dripping into my eyes. The station was empty. Too empty, no Crawford. No voices on the radio. No sound at all, just a single piece of paper waiting on the desk. Not there when I left. 4 words, scrawled in black ink. You're on the list. In black ink. You're on the list. The note sat on the desk like it was waiting for me. You're on the list. My hand shook as I picked it up. The paper was damp, edges soft like it had been pulled straight out of the rain. But the desk was dry. I turned it over. Nothing. Just those 4 words. And that's when I realized the handwriting matched the scrawl I'd seen in the old missing person file. Don't let them in. The air in the station felt wrong. Too still. Too heavy? Like someone was holding their breath in the same room. I checked every corner with my flashlight. Empty bunks. Empty kitchen. Empty office. But when I looked back at the door I'd locked, the padlock was hanging loose, open. I don't know why I ran. Instinct, maybe? I bolted out of the station and into the night, heart pounding, legs trembling. The forest swallowed me whole, the dark pressing tight around my shoulders. I didn't have a plan. No trail, no destination. Just a way. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. I wasn't running into the woods. I was being led. The hum started again. Low, deep, pulsing through the ground beneath my boots. It seemed to rise from the trees themselves, vibrating in my chest. Rattling my teeth, I staggered off the path, branches clawing at my arms. My flashlight beam bounced wildly, slicing through the dark. And there, through the trees, saw it. The tower, lit from within. Lanterns in every window. Glowing bright orange like eyes staring down at me. I stopped. My lungs burned. Sweat stung my eyes, but something pulled me forward. A weight. A pressure. Like my body wasn't my own anymore. Each step dragged me closer to the base of the tower. The padlock was gone now. The door wide open. Inside, the stairs stretched upward into darkness. Lantern light flickering at the top, and faintly, just faintly, I heard voices. Not one. Not two. Dozens. Layered together. Whispering. Murmuring. Calling, I recognized some of them. Names from the reports. Voices that hadn't been heard in years. I gripped the railing and began to climb. Each step groaned beneath me. The smell of rot rising stronger the higher I went. The whispers grew louder, filling my head, crawling beneath my skin. By the time I reached the top, my knees were shaking so badly I could barely stand. The room glowed with lantern light, brighter than before. Shadows danced across the walls, and the floor was covered in prints. Dozens of them heavy, sharp-edged, forming circles. Spirals, trails that led nowhere. But none of them were mine. I staggered to the center. The lanterns flickered once, then steadied, and the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Then, from behind me, a voice, clear, direct, right at my ear. You shouldn't have come. I spun, light flashing across the room empty. But when I turned back toward the window, I froze. Reflected in the glass was the station, not the tower, the ranger station, glowing under its porch light and inside through the window. I saw myself sitting at the desk writing in the logbook as, if none of this had ever happened, the floorboards shifted beneath me. The prints began to move again, circling fast, faster, until the whole room shook. The lanterns flared bright white and burst into darkness. Something cold pressed against my neck. A breath, a hand, and a whisper, low and final. Now you're ours. I don't remember leaving the tower. I don't remember running back through the woods. All I know is I woke up at dawn, slumped against the station wall, mud up to my knees. My radio cracked on the ground beside me. The tower isn't on the ridge anymore. I hiked there that morning. Stood in the exact spot. Nothing. No ruins. No frame. No trail. Just trees. But when I walked back to the station, the logbook was open on the desk, and the last entry written in my own handwriting said only, "Still watching, still watching."